The beast is known by many names across the cursed places of the world. In the coastal regions of the lands of men, the terrified and superstitious whisper in hushed voices of the lost admiral who prowls the wicked seas, preying on the beating hearts of mortals, forever seeking to quench your unending thirst. In the deep interior of the old world, as far south as Araby, the name Liliana can send freezing winds billowing through the souls of the weak, and as far south as Lustria, the worshippers of the old gods speak of a dead witch, known as the Void Banshee, who is prophesied to bring a terrible fog that rends the lands and sends its people into the seas. But in the far north, in the lands of Norska, where the world spins forward in present time, the name Vowbreaker is sung to the beating of discordant drums. A low howl manifests across the snowy plains as the beast marches forth from her rotted fleet of ancient and unfamiliar warships. But to know this monster is to know her past. To most, her influence on the world extends far beyond what most would consider ancient history. The mortal girl, whose name would later become a byword for vengeance and hatred across the land, was born Elizabeth Andrea de Valle, only daughter of the military strategist and mysteriously long-lived house of Sir Otto Andrea de Valle. She was born in a remote corner of Stirland, close to the border of Sylvania in the winter of 1857. Hers a lineage of honorable and especially decent nobility. The von Karstein influence was expanding rapidly during this age, and there were only but a few bulwarks against its encroachment across the lands of the Elector Counts. The de Valle family was one such obstacle. Refusing to give in to the fear-mongering and heathen evil of the von Karsteins, Stirland's best stood fast against the rising tide of its growing kingdom under their brilliant leader. As the years wore on, however, the pressure of standing sentinel against the darkness wore on the general of the Count of Stirland's military might. One evening, in a somber moment of desperation, he and his closest council stole away into the catacombs beneath the fortress at the edge of their territory, carrying candles and yellowed scrolls of the ancient traditions. Ever the inquisitive type, the young Elizabeth followed her father into the deep and watched as they prepared a strange altar and intoned prayers of a foreign-sounding tongue. It is said from that day forward, the General of Stirland, his family, and their elite guard no longer aged in the same way other mortals did. That blessing of Sigmar fell upon them that day in the Underdark, keeping every strand of the Count's hair from growing silver, and infusing the beleaguered warriors with a new vitality with which to fight back the relentless approaches of the von Karsteins. On Elizabeth's 23rd birthday, 6 years after the event in the vault, a man resplendent in burgundy armor appeared at the front gates of the castle, claiming to be an emissary of a distant warrior order. The man was looking for recruits, and hearing of the de Valle family's fabled military successes in the region, he now stood at their gates, seeking any young fighters who longed for travel and opportunity for even more glorious battle as knights of the famous Blood Keep. Elizabeth yearned to follow the man. Growing up as the daughter of a famous warrior of the people, she was born into the intensity of battle. Competent with a sword and gifted with impressive agility, she was no stranger to border skirmishes and other such attacks on their territories. But her father rebuked her request to go with him. As the only child of the general, and a woman at that, he desired for her to stay close, believing the violence of the outside world to be far more incalculable and dangerous. Enraged at his attempts to crush her opportunity for adventure and glory, she stole away in the night with a map from her father's library and a small pack of food for the long road ahead. Turning one last time, she saw a small light burning in a window in the walls of the otherwise dark fortress. Her father's face could be seen staring back at her, a shadowed mask of sorrow and pain. Cursing her family's name for wanting to hold her back from the world, she turned and rode off into the night. It is said that in the decades after her departure from her home, the General of Stirland grew sullen. Unable to age and die from his tortured spirit, he withdrew from communing with his men, eventually stepping out of the role of leadership entirely, While others stepped in to take leadership over the house, he left for the wilderness. Some say he resides there still, a madman of the Jägerwald. Others claim he took to the roads towards Blood Keep, desiring nothing more out of life than to see his daughter again. Only two things are certain. From that day on, the de Valle family never again saw rule over their house, and Sir Otto Andrea de Valle was never seen again. Elizabeth, however, found a new family. Although Blood Keep's warriors were all men, she impressed the dubious knights and gained entrance into Blood Keep from sheer skill at arms alone. Life was tough for her at first, her brothers holding her to a higher standard due to her gender, but she never felt unwelcome. The legendary nobility of the Knights of the Order of the Blood Dragon held true, and ultimately they came to accept her as a sister, protecting her with their lives just as she did the same in return. Of course, all of that changed in the year 1887, on a frigid autumn night, nearly 10 years after she had become a knight. Elizabeth's brothers would often tease her for looking the same at 33 as she did at 23, the lasting gift of long life given her by her discarded father. Yet little did they know that some of them too would see a similar trait by the end of that fateful night. A strange yet strikingly handsome man appeared before the knights of the fortress, with a declaration shouted through the iron bars of the giant gate. He could best all of the Order's knights in hand-to-hand combat. And with their honor challenged, the gates opened, allowing the man entrance. The battle was surreal. No matter what she did, the strange man deflected every blow Elizabeth threw, even while spinning to deflect the precise and complicated maneuvers of her brother's attacks. The man was quicker than her eye could follow, and as the night wore on, her strength and morale were quickly replaced with exhaustion and a sudden realization of her own mortality. Her brothers were dying by this man's hand by the minute, their attacks becoming more and more ineffectual as the weariness and desperation sunk deep into their muscles. Just before the end, Elizabeth learned the terrifying truth. The man was inhuman. Her last look was one of knowing as she met his gaze, his blood-slick sword stabbing through her chest. A heavy and unnatural darkness consumed her for what felt like an eternity, easily several times longer than the life she had already lived. But then she awoke, cold and thirsty. The man that had killed her introduced himself as Wallach Harkon, disciple of Abarash. He was a vampire. A handful of her brothers were also there to meet her awakening. Placing his alabaster hands upon her shoulder, he smiled, naming her Liliana. This was the first time she had ever felt completely empty inside. For 59 years, Blood Keep remained her home. Her memories of a good and decent life gave way to new cruelty. As she adjusted into her new self, she grew tortured, hungry to destroy those she had once protected. All she desired was to make Harkon proud. And that she did. Harkon favored her, eventually becoming her companion in the Dark Night. Over the decades, she grew obsessed with him. A power she could not control compelled her into his embrace. Then, the keep fell. After terrorizing the countryside for those near on 60 years, the surrounding territories formed together and assaulted the impenetrable fortress, proving ultimately that it was not. In the aftermath of the keep's destruction, Harkon sent Liliana on her first task by herself. She was to infiltrate the now unchecked von Karstein family to gain their loyalties. Harkon's secrets for this remained his own for years to come. But that did not matter to Liliana. She only had a desire to serve her master, and so this she did. Although her secret was kept safe, Vlad could initially see something amiss with the still young vampire. In his arrogance, he cursed her, ripping away from her the ability to administer the blood kiss. It was like having her tongue removed. She felt powerless, humiliated, and furious. The loyal von Karstein aristocracy shunned her as an inferior class. In her helplessness, it was Harkin's voice that calmed and soothed her ruined soul like a balm. It was he that compelled her to stay true to their mission. By the time Vlad sent his agents to the damned city of Mordheim to gather warpstone to fuel his already formidable magics 54 years later, Liliana had managed to gain admittance into his court, despite his heavy curse upon her spirit. Trusting her now as an ally, Vlad sent Liliana along with several other trusted and powerful allies to the city. Harkin's voice remained in her mind the whole time, guiding her hand and ensuring her loyalty. It was during this time that Liliana finally learned several truths. The mission to Mordheim was difficult for her, and her arrogance and pride were ripped away from her during her brutal skirmishes with the unfamiliar races that had also come in search of the precious material. But ultimately, she learned from her mistakes and became much more powerful because of it. This power was ultimately enough to bring her close to the demon core, the pure center of the warpstone meteor that had destroyed the city. Touching the artifact of pure dark magic, her mind and soul were shaken on an impossible level. She saw the future and the past while her body remained anchored to the ground, her mind torn away to see things beyond her comprehension. In these moments, she learned of Harkin's true intentions. He desired nothing more than to control the lands of Sylvania, driving the von Karstein family out forever. She was his tool. As the last remaining heir to the rightful rule of her family's name and lands, he would use her to gain control of it, becoming the tyrant general of the armies of Stirland and driving a vast and deadly campaign across the cursed lands of Sylvania. Her soul was torn. Her agony at this betrayal was unlike anything she'd ever experienced before. Screaming out at the night, the dark magic infusing the air around her and the demon core manifested as a mental shockwave, sundering her mind as she fell to the ground. She would not see it immediately, but through force of will and the influence of the demon core, she had severed the innate connection between master and thrall, the first vampire to ever destroy the link with her sire. She was free. Her mind once again her own, she murdered the von Karstein lackeys closest to her and raised them as servants, knowing they knew too much of her true allegiances. Making her way from the city, she had two desires in her heart: to destroy Harkin and to see the fool Vlad removed from the throne. Knowing of the powers that drove her kind, the tasks would not be easy, but she knew of a ring that Vlad never removed. In her long conversations with him, she had learned that the ring had a power to sustain him from even the most destructive of deaths. Assuming Harkin felt the severed connection as well, she knew she had to make her move before he could. But she needed the ring first. Her opportunity comes years later. The vampire wars begin as she is swept up once again into faking loyalty with Vlad's house. She knew that she needed patience to win the ring, even if it was only a matter of time before Harkin came after her. She saw her opportunity in the war. Vlad and his massive army swept across the lands of men, Liliana fighting alongside him and the other von Karstein fools for 41 years before her opportunity came. The afternoon was dark and warm when the mortal known as Felix Mann stole into their camp outside the walls of Altdorf. From within her casket, she smiled as she heard him sneaking about, for the demon core had shown her a glimpse of this moment. The thief would steal the ring off of Vlad's very hand and disappear into the wilderness. When Vlad awoke and the vampires prepared for all-out assault on the city, Liliana would not be with them. Cloaked, she watched from the dark when Vlad discovered the act. Enraged, he and his disciples made ready for war upon the city. But Liliana turned, for the second time in her life, running from a glorious and ultimately futile battle. The ride was hard, but she drove her nightmare steed through the night in the direction of her visions. Crossing through rivers and foothills, copses of trees and sleepy villages, she finally ran down the man, striking his spine with her rapier, and taking the ring from the dying hand, a look of shock and disbelief competing for terror and pain on his face. World-class thief indeed. As was becoming her own private custom, she waited for the man to breathe his last, before reaching out for his soul through the currents of dark magic that surrounded her, grasping it and taking complete control. Felix Mann, the greatest thief of the age, was now a mindless thrall of Liliana. With the ring in possession, her quest truly began. And it brings us closer to the story at present. From that day forth, she has searched for her nemesis and once companion. But he is no easy prey, as the von Karsteins warred with the worlds of mortals. She led a secret campaign against her own kind, tracking leads that led to secret places, that led to artifacts of power. For 500 years she has searched, gathering power in soldiers. Eventually, her quest leads to the Great Ocean. Raising long-sunken warships up from the depth, she now commanded a fleet. And although she cannot sire other vampires, for Vlad's curse upon her remains even after his death, she has found old companions in the scattered bands of Blood Knights still roaming the lands. The link between them and their master also severed from the cataclysmic mind shock in Mordheim. Necromancers have also come to seek her out, either driven by interest in her infamy or the promise of piracy. No matter the story, these individuals all act as her generals and captains upon the seas, proving worthy assets to her and her quest. The year is now 2522, and the name of Nagash is once again being heard on the winds in her homeland. But her quest has taken her elsewhere. She has learned of a place called the Vampire Coast, a hidden and secret place that lies across the Great Ocean. She has also learned of a man that resides there, by the name of Luther Harkin. Getting to this place is no easy task, and although the warships that bear her and her servants across the waters of the old world are mighty, crossing the world pond is treacherous, and she needs a flagship to make the journey. She has learned of just such a vessel, an ancient craft with red sails that travels under the cover of the blackest clouds, dark magic coursing through its very structure. What's more, it is rumored to have belonged to Harkin's mentor and sire, Abarash the Immortal. The ship lies at the bottom of the freezing waters of the Sea of Claws, far to the north. But the moon is bright in the sky, and the waters of Bretonnia are calm. Liliana, the Vowbreaker, smiles at her fortunes. The rage of Abarash will soon terrorize the coasts of the world once again under her command. She sails now for Kislev,